One of the big things that's happened here on our properties is we're getting the ground-dwelling birds back, we're getting the lizards, we're getting the woodland birds back. They're all coming back, and it's quite a different environment from what it was. So that in itself is enough feedback for us.
But my passion is to basically bring the bush back, allow the animals to evolve as they would naturally. That's what I've tried to do. It's been a passion of mine since I watched the work of Dr. John Walmsley, who created earth sanctuaries with his breeding and bringing back the bettongs and the woylies and bilbies, and those sanctuaries are absolutely amazing. I was interested in that whole concept of fencing areas out, but then I realised once I got property that to create impediments or barriers to movement creates a whole lot of issues then, that you then become responsible for the well-being of the animals within the enclosure. And so I realised that my contribution was going to be more about trying to reinstate the ecosystems as they were in the original history of Australia.
Reading the Explorer's Journals, Oxley, Cunningham, Sturt and Mitchell, thousands of pages of journals which have lots of relatively detailed information at times. The vegetation diversity and vegetation structures have become simplified over the 150 years of agriculture, and that has really helped foxes and cats in their predatory instincts.
The property had been neglected for many years. Feral goat numbers had built up, kangaroo numbers had built up, and the grasslands were basically the very common grasses you'll see, typical, less palatable grasses, so we're losing the grass diversity. The other thing I noticed was, where are all the Fabaceae? Where's the wonderful pea family? The early explorers would talk about these areas being covered in a carpet of wattle and bush peas, and yet I was seeing very little of that.
The Australian landscapes, the weathered soils, having that basis of acacia and bush pea covering that, was pumping atmospheric nitrogen into the soil. It's providing beneficial habitat for wildlife and insects, and it's contributing to the nitrogen cycle, which to me that was a key feature, a keystone. So the first steps that we took when we were looking at how to rehabilitate our properties was they were very overgrazed, and the step was taken then to make sure that we didn't continue that, so we didn't put any stock on. Then we looked at feral animal numbers and what pressures they were putting on the landscape. So we looked at, first of all, trying to have a professional harvest those goats. That succeeded in a very small extent, but then we had to finish it off by culling them out. There is a bit of a myth that goats eat weeds. Well, they do. They eat everything. They eat weeds, but their primary diet is actually grasses. So it's 70% of the bulk they eat. Once we got the goats off, we started seeing lots of grasses come back. Grasses such as the elemus, the tall wheatgrass, the windmill grasses, the panicums, the digitarias, spirobolus, the rat's tail grasses, beautiful symbopogons, thematids, ephemeral plants such as orchids and lilies. In stating that, we're getting the ground-dwelling birds back, we're getting the lizards, we're getting the woodland birds back. They're all coming back, and it's quite a different environment from what it was. I had done some research into the water in the Australian landscape. Oxley made some very interesting observations when his expedition left the Lachlan River because it was flooding, and it was headed south towards Rankin Springs. And anyone who knows that country is familiar that you're actually getting into mallee country there, very hard, very dry country, and there was no water. So what we've done on our property is to try and reduce its ability to harbour feral animals that love water, which are goats and feral pigs, and to possibly reduce the kangaroo numbers, so that's not really that practical. So when we had the really beneficial results there with the ground covers and the shrub layers coming back, one thing we had to obviously keep an eye on is what weeds were coming back through that as well. There are some very aggressive weeds that are now widespread in Australia. African lovegrass, blue heliotrope, St John's wort. These species have the ability to actually outcompete natives. It became apparent to me that some populations of those that needed to commit to trying to eradicate them. one of the interesting sidelines was when we were cutting firewood and we were stacking firewood to dry. I noticed that a lot of geckos were using that firewood. That led me to realise that, well, if they're so desperate to get cover in our firewood stack, I need to put some in the paddock. One, to encourage them not to harbour in the firewood stack, and two, to get them out back in the landscape. And we have used a combination of thinning of an invasive native species called cypress pine, black and white. They're ecologist species. We've used those thinnings to create habitat debris log piles on the ground. They're very easy to create, a little bit of work, but their animals' response to them is pretty much immediate. You will get insects using them first of all, and then you'll get antechinus, dunarts, and various lizards using that. Particularly, they'll use it as a shelter and harbouring area, so they're foraging activities. And if you put a bit of brush debris around them and put them in association with your vegetation areas, then straight away you're creating a habitat. You've got your new trees, you've got your new shrubs, and then you've got a shelter area for wildlife to operate from. So it's now becoming a functional ecosystem a lot quicker than what it would do if you had to wait for those trees to drop branches naturally. And the configuration of those habitat areas allows animals to get between the logs, and they have multiple exits they can use, so that it really helps with reducing predatory exposure. So with our revegetation program, we're basically looking at putting local indigenous species back. Around our garden areas, we'll also use lots of native ornamental plants. But in the paddock, we put in basically what you would call a copse of trees with shrubs. We'll also plant some ground cover species if they are available, things like the flax lilies and lamandras. Try and get some diversity in the ground covers if they're not already there. We might even put in some tall oak grass or some thermidors or those types of species because of their wonderful habitat that they provide. And we'll put in a diversity of plants to try and create complexity in the landscape, which that helps drive resilience. We're also trying to become climate ready in our project, in that there's a realisation that we're getting hotter and drier here. The semi-arid zone is moving eastwards, and so we're now incorporating some plants that come from the Cobar penny plain, things like inland red box, the coolabah, the black box, which is a floodplain tree which grows further out west. Around here we have fuzzy box, and black box takes over from it when you go out west. So we're now planting we've got fuzzy box, but we're also planting black box and coolabah trees as part of our floodplain regeneration. We're trying to tick all the boxes in terms of this being a project that will have long-term benefits long after we've gone. Yeah, so if you have an interest in doing works like this type of thing, it is extremely encouraging. The results you get will be all the reinforcement you need. The response you'll get from the animals is so quick when you plant a good shrub layer and a good tree layer, and you've got the ground covers there. The animals will respond, and that'll be all the feedback you need. So a very important thing to consider when you are regenerating the land for biodiversity outcomes is to know what is indigenous to your area, that it matches your soil type. The thing that we've really found wonderful with making this commitment to regenerating the landscape has been the landscape's response, its resilience to come back, the immediate response of the wildlife. They are coming in, they're enjoying the new system, they love the diversity, the shrubs, the nectar, the insects that are growing. It's all comes together so quickly that it's quite an amazing thing to witness, and that's your positive feedback. That's what's been the best part of it all. It's the best part of the journey, is to see that what you're doing is going to have benefit for as long as it's around.